My name is Jason James. Welcome to the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation, virtually speaking. So these are the people taking part today, all looking very happy, with the possible exception of me. And so we've got Peter and Sheila in London. I'm in Cambridge, and Hiroko-san is in Tokyo. And I'll just briefly introduce them before handing over to them. I think there's another, yeah. So this is Hiroko. I'm not going to read out everything that is on this slide, but Hiroko is an artist and co-founder, creative director of Invisible. You'll see in the second paragraph, she was in the US for 20 years, which goes a long way to explain her excellent English. And she was heavily involved in art-related efforts after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan. And basically her work is very largely about art as a way to build community and cultural institutions. Okay, let's skip on to the next one. So Sheila and Peter, committed internationalists. They're engaged in a whole load of different projects, which you can see in the second paragraph, and I won't go through them all, but ODD, the Arts and Citizenship Dimension of Reshape, Labs of Care. So Peter comes from a museum and gallery background, founded the New Art Gallery in Walsall, and Sheila was in the think tank Demos and is currently vice chair of Compass. And they both have this Danish connection. And I think on that, I will pass over to our speakers to get things properly started.
Thank you so much, Jason, and also to Daiwa Foundation and to Alice and Edmund and Nana, particularly for making this happen. And welcome to all of you. We know that you are in different time zones, I think. So for some of you, it's the morning, for some of you, it's the evening, and everywhere in between. So thank you for taking the time to be here with us. I'm going to suggest, if you want to turn on your video, as Jason said, and also to shift to gallery view. At the top right-hand side of your screen, you should be able to hit gallery view, and then you can see all this wonderful array of faces and people from so many different places.
It's a temporary family.
A temporary family. Yeah, we first met with Hiroko some years ago at the Salzburg Global Seminar running the Young Cultural Innovators Programme. And we've worked together a bit since then, but we consider ourselves, I think, now to be family. Hiroko feels more like a sister to me than a collaborator, and we wanted to try and bring some of that spirit into this gathering. And we're talking about creation, community and communication, and that this be a temporary community. And it was also in Salzburg where we met Nana, and this webinar came into being, I guess, from those connections. And we also know, I think, that there are some fellows from the Salzburg Young Cultural Innovators with us. So welcome to those parts of the family as well. Susie. And Susie as well from Salzburg. So welcome to all of you into this space. Because we wanted this to feel more like a community than a lecture, we felt we would try to work this in a slightly different way. So we'll talk a little bit, but we also intended to suggest 3 actions that we'll do together during our short time that we're in this space. So the first one that we wanted to start with, knowing that we all are going through such an incredible range of emotions as we feel our way through this crisis, complexity, and all its implications. So I think you were asked on the original invitation to have a pen and a piece of paper to hand. Don't worry if you don't, because we can also use the chat for this. But if you want to grab that, if you have it, and I'll just give you some very basic, brief instructions. If you want to just take a moment to think about what's the thing that you are most feeling right now. Just 1 or 2 words. Take a moment to just catch up with yourself and find that. and then just to write it on that piece of paper and in the chat if you can. And then just hold on to that for a moment, because we'll then ask you all at the right moment to all hold them up to the screen so we see the complex and beautiful array of where we are all at in our hearts at the moment, and what we're feeling at this second.
And if you like, you can just poke your eyes above the paper. It's up to you. Or
when we do it, what you want to say.
hopefulness.
Yep. So, Raymond, I can see that you are impatient to get that up there.
Yeah.
Should we just take a moment and just lift? Our screen is the wrong way round, but lift what we're feeling to share when you're ready. And anxiety and hope, impatient, intimacy, relaxed, nervous but entertained. Yeah, I feel nervous too. Engaged, worried,
Anxiety,
peaceful, uncertain and frustrated, still, whirlwind. Okay. Thank you. Blessed. Yeah.
that's lovely.
We recognize how privileged perhaps we are in some of this space. Thank you for that. And I think it gives you some sense of the kind of huge range of feelings that we're all living with. And as we know, I don't know, certainly for me, those change on an hourly, if not a daily basis, what is the primary kind of emotion that's working with us. If you have time, please, relieved from stress, I shall come on to that in a minute. If you have time, please do put those into the chat, because one of the things we'd like to do from a couple of the actions that we'll do together is to take your beautiful sentiments and put them into a word cloud as a kind of artifact, as a kind of moment of recognition of the kind of what we're feeling. I assume you mostly know what a word cloud is, that actually gathers the sentiments and gives strength to those that are most shared and those that are sort of more individual, which we'll send back to you and probably hopefully share through Daiwa. So anyway, we've got all these multiple complex feelings and emotions going on, and quite early in this lockdown crisis, Peter and I were talking with a friend who's an academic artist, curator called Declan McGonigal. And he said to us, the word apocalypse, its origins, its meaning is revelation, revealing, unveiling. And we started thinking a lot about what that then means for what can we see now that was invisible to us before, or hidden. And what have we lost that we maybe didn't know that we had, and what have we gained that we weren't aware was possible in this apocalypse, in this unveiling, and what actions and relationships did we not know how to value that we're now starting to understand differently, that we now know are invaluable to us in our lives and in our sanity and in our solidarity. Care obviously being one of those fundamental things, and understanding that we've undervalued those who care or not even seen them as being part of the productive side of our work and our economies, but we know that they are essential to our lives and our livelihoods. Health, obviously, community and solidarity, And creation. We've been very aware of how many people are, as the stillness has kind of descended for all its goods and ills, have taken time to make music, to sing, to cook, to sew, to go back to the more reproductive sides of our existence that very often we just don't have time for, and we don't see as being significant to us. And the other question we were exploring with Hiroko-san was a little of what therefore can we unlearn in this time, and what do we need to relearn, and how do we try and reconstruct our relationships, our communities, and our infrastructures in art and culture as much as in more widely in our society and our economies and our politics. And I think our sense is that this is very slow and patient work. It's detailed, intimate work that enables us to think about the small things that need to happen in order for us to kind of transform as we move through this space, and not just postpone with everything on hold, and we just go back to exactly the same space that we were in before. And so how we start to think and relate and build differently through this space and this time frame. I'm going to stop there because I've talked quite enough. I'm going to hand over to Peter to share some thoughts.
Well, hello everyone again, and I'm thrilled and delighted to be here, and so excited to put on some perfume, but you won't be able to smell that, unfortunately. But there will be a day that comes when we can do all that intimate stuff together. And as Sheila's already said, this is apocalypse is a fantastic challenge for us all who are lucky enough still to be alive, and also the chance for deep personal and collective reflection, in which we have many, many more questions than we have answers. One major question is clearly whether, when all this is finally over, we believe we'll return to business as usual, that we'll return back to normal, or what people are calling a new normal. And we all know that across the world, artists and arts and creative organizations have rushed to put everything online in an almost overwhelming tsunami of content of every kind, which continues to treat us predominantly as consumers and not active participants, delicious though all of that offer is. But does this tsunami merely cover up rather than reveal some serious structural issues that were staring at us in the arts, culture and creative community before this overwhelming nightmare began? The questions of overproduction of plays and concerts and exhibitions, the list goes on. The problematics of festivalization, of touristification, of ruinous gentrification, often driven by the arts in cities and other communities around the world. The living and working in exclusive and smug bubbles of art privilege and exclusion and protectionism that keep most of us out, that exclude us rather than wrap us up in that essential world of creativity and imagination in new ways. But if we look and see with different eyes and different assumptions, we can see glimmers of change during this crisis that Sheila and I and Hiroko feel very excited about. Going back to normal, to convention, to exclusion and special pleading for the arts and culture doesn't feel perhaps the right way. And we can see in the cultural ecosystem the growth in whole landscape of care and empathy and feminization and the exposure of the deep wells of humanity that the 99% of us really are part of. And in volunteering and in mutual aid, the building of new connections and transformed relationships, of new solidarities and unprecedented cross-sectoral collaborations in which our selfish bubbles are burst at long last. An enhanced sense of active citizenship with the feeling that we're all in this together. we're putting the co into COVID. We're seeing practice that is less transactional, extractive, or exploitative of the people formerly known as the audience. And we're seeing funders, brave funders, who are switching from supporting production, even if it's postponed, to production as usual, to solidarity funding in a fragile ecosystem in which the smallest are in danger. And there's increasingly widespread recognition of the essential role of imagination of moments of crisis and peril such as this. Imagination as an active, creative, social and political force to forge radical new realities and new solutions for us as individuals and wider societies. And secondly, and most importantly, perhaps at the center of this context of slowing down, is a growth of seeing and noticing things that you had never seen before and feeling things that you've never felt before. There is a sense of the hyper-local and of extraordinary intimacy, which Hiroko will be talking about very much, but equally an intimacy that is in parallel with others. And to quote, as we always do, the shortest poem in the English language ever, written by Muhammad Ali, me, we. The balance between the me and the we is where we are at this moment. So there are thrilling examples from around the world of people beginning to shift. A famous dance troupe acting as pallbearers, as coffin carriers at funerals in Accra. A vital arts program shining a light on the critical role of immigrants as first responders in New York City. A museum of COVID created in London. A refugee centre opened in an arts centre in Brussels. A luxury fashion designer making masks for people in one of the poorest neighbourhoods in Nairobi. A festival of nothing across the Czech Republic. And an explosion of street art and DJs creating isolation discos everywhere to get our hearts and bodies moving. And thousands of other examples of imaginative, shape-shifting, artist-led work everywhere across the world. And please, if you have your own favorites, please share them now on the chat, because we just need to get inspiration from all of these brilliant shapeshifters that are emerging on a daily basis everywhere. And then reflect yourself at this moment on what you see, and more importantly, what you see about yourself as changing. Or do you think you're going to stay exactly as you were before this human catastrophe struck us all? How do you see things? Hiroko.
Thank you, Peter. So everybody ready? One next action. What are you really seeing? What are you really seeing? So please all look outside of the window and observe as much as you can for a minute. And then please make sure to be very silenced. So I'll count. Are you all ready? Go. Okay, time is up. So if you don't mind writing on the chat what you really saw, that'd be great. And then as you're writing it, I'll start my part of a little bit of my thought into this beautiful conversation that we're having and what we're about to have. And my name is Hiroko again, and I'm back in Tokyo and needing for a lot of intimacy. And I'm very happy to be here today to get some sense of it, although it's through this monitor, but I see some of the familiar faces and then feeling very supported. So, you know, when Peter and Sheila talked about me and we, and then what I do here for my work has a lot to do with understanding me and we. And then, you know, since we have very limited time, I want to share some of my thoughts as a Japanese woman, and as well as what I've been doing since the COVID that has sort of outbroke our heart, and see where we go. And then, so like Peter and Sheila are saying, I've been unlearning and relearning, posing questions about the approach and the methodology of community engagement and development. And then because of the very obvious reasons, then the usual tactics are no longer applicable. So, you know, what am I going to do about it? So what I've been doing in this, under this very special condition, I've been posing myself questions to strategize the new and experimental approach to really sort of see what the communication can be and how to really build the community in that way. And let me share some of my questions to myself. So one, how can we make the element of distance more positively to build communications? I'm really kind of challenge myself to rebuild the concept of distance. The second one is, how do I take advantage of this notion of stay home? Can this incredible isolation be an asset? Can we create more intimate relationship because they are not distracted or influenced by other members of community? Number three, how can we gather and cultivate information in a more culturally resonant way? Especially when we as in sort of, you know, my partner and all that, and then we engage community members without actually meeting them to build the relationship and a sense of trust. How do we really do that? And then despite that situation, how can I make sure the process itself is more culturally resonant and familiar for the Japanese community? And then, you know, it's really been thinking a lot about, because of the isolation, you know, partially being compartmentalized in everyday life, that it makes me more skewed toward understanding my community more than ever. And then the last one is, how can art play into the factor? What is the role of art or the artist? Which is more of a general questions that I'm pretty sure some of you here are also questioning. And then sort of like, you know, I've been thinking and pondering all those questions upon myself with my fellow, who is actually here, Akio, and also used to be the fellow Salzburg Global Seminars as well. And then before I get into sort of like one of the examples that I want to show, or more like a challenge that we were doing, I wanted to kind of set myself back to really thinking sort of, what is it that I am actually unlearning and relearning about my culture? So maybe, you know, some of you are very fluent about, you know, my culture, but let me just kind of lay out some of the things that I've been thinking about. So say that Japan is commonly known as having a high context culture, right? So that actually means that there is an emphasis on implicit, indirect, and ambiguous communication. Like we have the term like reading the air, like seeing the sky, but what is it that it poetically means to us? And here 1, no 10 kind of things. And then there is also the term called sashiru, that actually means that the process of anticipatory guesswork requires to fill out each other's communication. and the strategies were players to try to understand as much as possible from the little that is said. And then haiku, for example, or more like tanka, which is sort of dated back to, 600, to 1100, but especially in Heian period, which is about 800. And there is a custom of aristocratic men and women composing poetry to express their feelings to each other as gifts. Now, oftentimes, they're far apart and don't even have any acquaintances in advance. And they exchange poetry in long distance and ended up deciding on their love mate and partners, and solely based on the exchange of written text. And then also some of you might know that culturally, the Japanese, I might not really fit into the category per se, but usually sympathetic to others' behaviors, including the facial expression and the tone of our voices, so that we do not offend the other person's feelings, so on and so on and so on. But like, what if I take all those things and then formulate it into the hypothesis of really understanding the community and building people? So let's say the Japanese are more comfortable speaking in direct ways and abstract communication methods. Is there a possibility that is speaking in poetry or much constrained form in order to retain more essential contents than the face-to-face conversation to understand each other or their perspective about their community? So, I mean, it's a very broad kind of thought still, and then I haven't been able to really narrow it down to what that really means, but it's at least a hypothesis. And then Akio and I've been sort of working very sort of closely on to understanding that very particular small scale intimacy that I can really create the larger, a deeper communication and relationship. So let me just kind of quickly share one of the projects that we are working on. And it's very broad, and still we are trying to see if this even works. So let's see. So I've been back here since 2011, and like as Jason has introduced me, and I came back to Japan after the earthquake and the Great Tsunami in 2011. And then one of the things that I wanted to sort of really do was, for sure, that what can I do to bring and apply my experiences back in the United States to really understand, engage community. But after the COVID, all my sort of techniques and all my learning kind of has to be relearned in the way that I was explaining earlier. So what we've been doing is, like, this is where we are in Tokyo, and we have some sites in Fukushima, Niigata, and Nagasaki. But I just want to kind of briefly kind of point to the way that we are trying to sort of engage people that we never ever met, or the places that we haven't actually been to for the site visits that we usually do to understand community. So given all that, and then let me say here, yeah. Can you all see okay? Somewhat? So we've been sort of trying to figure out this idea of remote co-creation. I mean, in some way that, this is kind of obvious. How do you sort of collaborate virtually? But that's not quite what we mean by it. We really sincerely actually mean that what if we never meet each other, just like a blind date in that way. But then we want to sort of engage artists as a researcher, as in a partnership, the community member as an informant, and see if the informant can be our eyes and feels and touches, and can we sort of transform some of our senses to gaze into the community and exchange within the very constrained communications, which is, say, what if we only exchange handwritten letters 12 times per year and see what can we communicate through that? And if the sound artist becomes a researcher, he or she might ask, collect the sound and type it up in text and see what we can learn from it. I mean, we still haven't figured out exactly what kind of elements that make sense for this remote co-creation. But a general idea is to make sure that there is a common ground that is about unknown, and then try to figure out the known. And then what ends up happening, the artists end up making some type of output as a way to, as a pure means of art. And someone might think that, and it can function as a research and results and findings. It's very abstract, but at the same time, it might actually means, or it might say it's more than actual facts that actually read or hear. And then also, this is also functions of the archive of a process itself. So, we're still exploring all those options, but at the same time, we want to kind of use this very special moment as an opportunity to figure out how else we can sort of co-create and co-communicate and then relate each other and to learn about community. So almost time is up. So let me kind of slowly pass it on back to Peter and Shelagh. But we want to sort of revisit back to what we've been talking about. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer anything. So back to you, Peter and Shelagh.
Thank you, Hiroko. Beautiful and clear as ever. I've just been looking back on the chat from what everyone said they saw in that lovely minute of stillness and silence. That is a poetry in itself, and incredibly beautiful. And I hope it felt like a useful, in the sense of actually just coming into this kind of space in a different way.
And a minute's a really long time, isn't it?
There's a few questions that are appearing on the chat, and we'll come into Q&A in a moment. But before we do that, I think just what we'd like to try and share from this webinar, and that Hiroko and Peter and I have a kind of commitment to work further on this. This is in many ways a kind of part of a journey of understanding and taking all this forward, and we'd be really interested to hear more from you about how these kind of responses to intimacy and possibility and the hyperlocal and the remaking, relearning that we're in, and what that means. But before we do that and go and hear your beautiful voices, we just wanted to take third action that Hiroko had suggested from her practice, which is just to take a moment and again put it in the chat if you want to, or hold it in your head of what it is you feel you're wishing for right now. What are you wishing? And that might be for lunch, or it might be
dinner, for
a hug, or it might be the end of the climate crisis, or anything in between. But just a moment to think about what comes into your head when you think, what am I really wishing for right now? And if you can and want to, please share it in the chat, because as we say, this is all part of what we'd like to try and work with and bring back to you in various ways. A swim, yes, please. Motivation. Sanctuary. Oh. Go to the library. Things will be different after this. To meet my friends, hug people, fried rice, fried rice with ikon, please.
Now I'm hungry.
Mm-hmm. Freedom. Yeah, to go to the supermarket without feeling nervous. To fly to Japan, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Normality. Beer.
That's a loud one.
To visit my family in Egypt, the Highlands, visit Italy. Oh, thank you. Go to a beach. Thank you so much.
All of those wishes will come true, obviously.
Well, we hope so. I think we'll stop there and hand over to Jason, if that's okay, to take us into the Q&A. The only thing we thought in terms, I mean, Q&A is such a restricted format. So I mean, we're very happy to respond and develop the conversation, but also we felt very strongly if others want to respond to questions, then please use the chat to do that. This isn't just about our voices in this.
We're not the experts here.
We all are collectively, and that's the point.
Okay.
So, Jason.
So thank you very much.